Hello, it's Pastor Cook of Spirit Life Fellowship, living a spiritual life. We would like to welcome every one of you to our service this day. We pray that you will be blessed through the services and that you will find ways to apply this message to your lives and each week. Come and be with us.
Starting in Judges 6, verses 25 through 26. And now it came to pass the night that the Lord said to him, "Take your father's young bull, the second bull of 7 years old, and tear down the altar of Baal that your father has, and cut down the wooden image that is beside it, and build an altar to the Lord your God on top of this rock in the proper arrangement, and take the second bull and offer a burnt sacrifice with the wood of the image which you shall cut down." Okay? Now Gideon probably at that moment had one of those, "You want me to do what?" responses. My father's altar, you want me to tear it down? Let me get this straight. I'm going to use the wood for the fire, and use his bulls. Whew, okay. You know, Baal was the most prominent god at this time. They worshipped a lot of gods. They probably worshipped the god, but he was just one alongside of the others. But Baal was the big one, okay? Because he was the agricultural god. He was the sun god, the weather god. He controlled the crops. Well, what were they going through right now? One of the worst crises they've had in their whole time. You know, every time they would grow a little bit of grain to have some food, the Midianites would swarm in like the locusts and take it away. These people were starving. They were in crisis. Their last, albeit false, hope was Baal. Okay? So to attack Baal, to tear down that altar, was taking away their last hope, though it be a false hope. That's where they had put their hope, was in Baal. So this would be a big deal to attack Baal at this time with the way the people were. You know, they weren't just in a downturn, they had hit rock bottom. So, you know, here we have Gideon, and he has kind of played himself off to be, oh, I'm this least man in the least tribe. But he really wasn't so least. And here's why I think that. You know, here this altar was on his father's land. They were landowners. That's a big deal, to be a landowner. You know, they weren't these vagabonds traveling all over the place. They had a home. They had land. And the altar was on his father's land. They had livestock. You know, he said, take these bulls to use them for the sacrifice. So they had things. They had some wealth. You know, he wasn't just some nobody out on the street. Okay? He thought he was. And so before Gideon could go out and deliver all the people and lead them, you know, in the ways of God, you know, he had to get things in order at home first. You have to have things in order in your own house before you can go out and do these things. You know, choose today who you're going to serve. And I'm not necessarily saying your house, but your house. If you're going to go out and witness, this house has to be in order. Okay? So choose this day who you're going to serve. And he was also using his father's bull and tearing down his father's altar. And how was Dad going to react to that? How was Dad going to feel about that? Who was very intimidated about their dad? Raise your hand. Chrissy? Yep. They always say Mama's not happy. Let me tell you, if Daddy's not happy, it's not a good thing either. So he's got to tear down the altar. He's going to cut down the wooden image. Now that was Asherah. And she was a fertility Canaanite goddess. And they would, she was like the moon goddess, so she was kind of the complement to Baal. He was the sun, the weather, and she was the moon. the fertility goddess. So they would take a trunk that had been trimmed with no limbs, and they would carve basically her image into the trunk. And the places of worship where they would set these were called groves. So you often see this referred to as a grove. So when you see that, that's what that means. And so Gideon was to cut that down and use it for the firewood, because that's about all it was good for. Verse 27. So Gideon took 10 men from among his servants and did as the Lord had said to him. But because he feared his father's household and the men of the city too much to do it by day, he did it by night. Okay, so here's Gideon. He's the least of the least, but you know what? He has servants. It didn't say they were his father's servants. They said they were his servants. Okay, so here, you know, he's the least of the least, but he's got servants. He lived in a household with servants, and he's got land. Isn't it funny sometimes the impression we have of ourselves and how different it is from the perception that others have of us? People probably looked at him and thought, boy, that Gideon, he's got it made. They've got land. He's got servants, you know. He's good in a wine press, you know. But he didn't see himself that way. He saw himself as just the least of the least. It is. It's funny the difference, the way our self-image and then the way others see us. And of course it says that he was afraid of his father. And he was afraid of his father's household and of the men in the city. So he went out and did it by night, you know, so nobody could see. So, you know, while he didn't come out the first time swinging and all bold and everything, he was obedient. He still did what God asked him to do. Verses 28 through 30. And when the men of the city arose early in the morning, there was the altar of Baal torn down, and the wooden image that was beside it was cut down, and the second bull was being offered on the altar which had been built. So they said to one another, who has done this thing? And when they had inquired and asked, they said, Gideon, the son of Joash, has done this thing. When the men of the city said to Joash, bring out your son that he may die, because he has torn down the altar of Baal, and because he has cut down the wooden image that was beside it. Well, you know, you can try to go out by night. You can try to go out and do this by secret. But you know what? There's always somebody that's going to tell on you. There is always somebody that's just ready to tell on you. So it didn't take long for them to figure out who was responsible. And then they were out for blood. Literally. They wanted Gideon's blood. They wanted to kill him. That's how mixed up, that's how turned around these Israelites had become. You know, here was Gideon. He really did something good. He tore down this altar of Baal to try to bring them back to the worship of the one true God. But he was the one they wanted to kill. You know, Isaiah 5:20 says, woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. You know, things had just totally turned around. You know, they were calling him evil for tearing down an idol. Verses 31 through 32. But Joash said to all who stood against him, would you plead for Baal? Would you save him? Let the one who would plead for him to be put to death by morning. If he is God, let him plead for him. If he is a god, let him plead for himself, because his altar has been torn down. Therefore on that day he called him Jerubbaal, saying, let Baal plead against him, because he has torn down his altar. So you can just imagine this mob showing up at Joash's house, and Gideon's probably back in there doing, you know, scared to death. His knees are knocking together, saying, see, God, I told you, you're going to get me killed. I told you that I shouldn't do this. You see, I told you about these people. You're gonna now listen, you're going to get me killed. And what? And wait a minute, what? What did Dad say? What did my dad just say? He said, let Baal plead. That had to surprise him. You know, when it says to plead, that means be an advocate for. Not like beg, but, when you plead a case, you're being an advocate for someone. So Joash says, hey, if Baal is all you say he is, then he can defend himself. And this seems to quiet the mob down. Well, I guess I never thought of it that way, Joash. You're right, Baal can take care of himself. So they give Gideon this nickname, Jerubbaal. Let Baal contend with him. And when I read this, I thought about the story of Elijah and the prophets of Baal. It's kind of a similar concept. He's like, okay, let your God do this, Come on. Let him bring down the fire. Okay, we're waiting. If Baal's a real God, he can take care of it. So Joash surprised everyone with his response. He could have reacted. He could have, been like, Gideon, you are making me look bad, son. What were you thinking? But he didn't. And maybe Joash had been taught the ways of God, and maybe deep down he had wanted to get back to the ways of God, but he didn't have the courage. Here this was on his property, everybody looked up to him, and his son stepping out in faith and doing this gave him the courage to stand up also. You never know when you take a stand and when you stand up who you might inspire by what you do. So that's something to keep in mind. That's right. You don't see crazy till you bother one of my kids, right? All right. So verses 33 through 35. Then all the Midianites and the Amalekites, remember all those locusts, the people of the east gathered together, and they crossed over and encamped in the valley of Jezreel. But the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon. Then he blew the trumpet, and the Abiezrites gathered behind him. And he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, who also gathered behind him. He also sent messengers to Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they came up to meet them. Okay, so the Midianites, the Amalekites, the people of the east, those various kind of locusts that we talked about. And it says, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon. So there's our supernatural, okay? That's our supernatural aspect. The same thing happened with Othniel. Remember the first judge, when it was time for him to go out and lead them into battle, it said that the Spirit of God came upon him. So now Gideon, with the Spirit of God on him, has this new boldness. And he blows the trumpet and he calls for the people. And the first to follow are his own family, that least of the least, the Abiezrites, okay, and Manasseh, and then their neighboring tribes, Asher, Zebulun, Naphtali. And we'll learn here in chapter 7, 32,000 men responded to this call, okay? So they've gone from just being spread out and hiding in caves and, trying to lay low to reporting to the battlefield because the Spirit of the Lord has drawn them there. Verses 36 through 38. So Gideon said to God, if you will save Israel by my hands, if you... is that where I'm at? Hold on just a second. Okay. So Gideon said to God, if you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said, look, I shall put a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there is dew on the fleece only, and it is dry on all the ground, then I shall know that you shall save Israel by my hand, as you have said. And it was so. When he rose early the next morning and squeezed the fleece together, he wrung the dew out of the fleece, a bowl full of water. So Gideon, again, the least of the least, and not very long ago was hiding in a wine press, threshing wheat, just so they could have a little bit of food. Now he has 32,000 men waiting for orders. You could almost imagine him peeking out through the window saying, oh snap, they all showed up. They actually showed up. Is this for real? I'm starting to wonder if this is for real. What's going on here? So now he needs some encouragement. He needs some confirmation. So he has this fleece. Now what is a fleece? It's a coat of wool. Okay? So we've got this coat of wool. Is that you, God? Is that really, really you? That's what he's feeling. So he says, if you'll do this, I want the fleece to be wet. I want the dry to be ground. the ground to be dry. Then I'll know it's you and that you're going to use me to save Israel. Well, not only was that fleece wet and the ground dry, but when he wrung it out, he wrung out a bowl full of water. Now, you know, with dew on the ground, you know, it's usually just a surface wetness, and it dries and evaporates pretty fast. So that wasn't the case with this wool. It wasn't just like it was damp to the touch. He wrung a bowl full of water out of it. Okay? Now, Gideon actually might have been a little disappointed, because deep down he might have been hoping that this was all wrong, you know, that this has all been a big mistake and he could go back to the way things were. You know, once you step out, you can never go back to the way things were, okay? So a part of him, you know, like, oh, but then when he starts his next words to God, after he sees that this has happened, he says to him, don't be mad, but. Okay, do your kids ever come and say that to you? Mom or Dad, don't be mad, but. Accidentally let the dog out and he's down the road. Don't be mad, but I tripped over something and I might have accidentally bumped into the table and knocked your favorite lamp off of the floor and it broke. Don't be mad, but I might have actually accidentally spilled milk over the computer keyboard. Don't be mad, but I might have shaved my head and I'm on my way home. You know, you just never know what's going to come out of their mouths. And actually, I hear this a lot from my husband, too. Don't be mad, but. You know, there is nothing good that ever comes after don't be mad, but. There's nothing good that ever comes after. You know what comes after don't be mad, but? Something that's going to make you mad. That's what comes after that. Okay? So here, let's see what he says to him. 39 through 40. Then Gideon said to God, do not be angry with me, but let me speak just once more. Let me test, I pray, just once more with the fleece. Let it now be dry only on the fleece, but on the ground there will be dew. And God did so that night. It was dry on the fleece, but there was only dew on all the ground. Okay? So don't be mad, but I just want to make really, 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 really sure, God, that it's you. You know, we waste a lot of time on, is it really, 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 really you, God? So this time he says, I'm going to switch it up. I want a dry fleece and wet ground. But you know what? God didn't get mad. He didn't yell at him. He didn't fire him. He went ahead and he gave him the sign that he wanted. He was very patient, and he did what Gideon asked. You know, Gideon is very new in his faith. You know, this is very much at the beginning of his walk with God, and if you think back to what that was like, it's a little shaky. You know, you see a little baby deer that gets up and or a little colt, and their legs are wobbly. He's still in that stage, so he needs some encouragement. He needs his faith to get built up. And better, a little faith that needs to be encouraged than no faith at all. I mean, Gideon could have just thrown up his hands and walked away from the beginning and said, this isn't for me. Not me. But instead, he faced that fear and he faced that doubt. And he said, God, you know, I'm sorry, but I need to know. You know, I need some encouragement here. So he uses this fleece. You know, he's fleeced. And a lot of people will talk about fleecing God. Now, the common slang use of the term fleecing today means to cheat or to steal. If you're fleecing somebody, you're pulling the wool over their eyes, you're tricking them. And in some ways, we are kind of cheating God when we fleece him, because we're not giving him our full trust. We're not walking in faith. We're constantly asking for reassurance. It kind of cheats the relationship a little bit. But he's a patient and he's a loving God, and he helps us through those times. Okay. We're going to move over into chapter 7, verses 1 and 2. Then Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the people who were with him rose early and encamped beside the well of Harod. so that the camp of the Midianites was on the north side of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. And the Lord said to Gideon, the people who are with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel claim glory for itself against me, saying, my own hand has saved me. Okay? So Gideon, he's now ready to lead these men against the Midianites, and they set up their base camp. They're just south of where the Midianites are camped. And God says there's too many, 32,000. And he said, wow, that's way more than we need. And if we defeat the Midianites with 32,000 men, they're going to take the credit for it. They're going to say, well, it's because, we're a big, strong, burly men, and there's 32,000 of them, and we did this. We're the ones that beat them. And what he needed them to know was that it was God. In Deuteronomy 8, verses 11 through 17, Moses warns the Israelites. He says, beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments, his judgments, and his statutes, which I command you today, lest when you have eaten and are full and have built beautiful houses and dwell in them, and when your herds and your flocks multiply, and your silver and gold are multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied, when your heart is lifted up, and you forget the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage, who led you through the great and terrible wilderness in which there were fiery serpents and scorpions and thirsty land where there was no water, who brought water for you out of the flinty rock, who fed you in the wilderness with manna, which your fathers did not know, that he might humble you and he might test you to do good in the end. Then you will say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand gave me this wealth. He's saying, hey, God's brought us through all this stuff, and now we're going to enjoy the fruits of it. And don't get so fat on it that you forget how you came by it. Don't forget that you have this because of God. It's real easy to cry out to God and when we're going through tough times, but we need to do it in the good times as well. We need to remember why we have these good times. He's with us all the time. He didn't want them to forget where they came from, and that's what God is wanting these people to also realize. Because he goes on, Moses went on to warn them that if they did forget and they started worshiping other gods, that they would perish just like the nations that God was driving out when he brought Joshua and the people in. So he didn't want them to forget that. Verse 3. Now therefore proclaim in the hearing of the people, saying, whoever is fearful and afraid, let him turn and depart at once from Mount Gilead. And 22,000 of the people returned, and 10,000 remained. All right, anybody that's scared? Anybody scared? Go home. I can see it now. Don't have to tell me twice, y'all. God bless. Goodbye. Peace out. I'm going home. 22,000 of them got up and left. Sure, we'll admit it. We're scared. So that left 10,000. Compared to 32, that's a smaller amount, but that's still pretty respectable little army. 10,000. Okay. Verses 4 through 5. But the Lord said to Gideon, the people are still too many. Bring them down to the water, and I will test them there for you. Then it will be that of whom I say to you, this one shall go with you, the same shall go with you. And of whomever I say to you, this one shall not go with you, the same shall not go with you. So he brought the people down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, everyone who laps from the water with his tongue as a dog laps, you shall set apart for himself. Likewise, everyone who gets down on his knees to drink. Okay, so 10,000, that was still too many. So he's like, bring them down to the water, and I've got this little test. We'll sort them out. Whichever, they do, we're going to sort them out by how they do this. Verses 6 through 8. And the number of those who lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, was 300. But all the rest of the people got down on their knees to drink water. Then the Lord said to Gideon, by the 300 men who lapped I will save you, and deliver the Midianites into your hand. Let all the other people go, every man to his place. So the people took provisions and their trumpets in hands, and he sent away all the rest of Israel, every man to his tent, and retained those 300 men. Now the camp of Midian was below him in the valley. You mean I have to keep the 300, not this group over here? Oh. So yeah, he sent 7,700 men home out of this 10,000 army. Okay? And that was an interesting way to sort them out, you know. The 300 would be okay if it was the 300 strongest and the 300 bravest and the 300 best sword fighters or, you know, most battle experience. But we don't know. I mean, that's not how they were separated out. It was how they drink water out of the river. That's how they separated them. And you can almost see Gideon's heart coming up in his throat as those 7,700 men go away and he's left with the ragtag 300. Can you imagine? And he's looking down the valley, and there's all those Midianites down there. You know, that locust field down there, and he's got 300 men left. And it had to be pretty intimidating. But the stage is now set, and Gideon has to be wondering, how is this going to happen? How is this going to come to pass? And we often get to that point too. God sets us up and we think things are going, and then something happens and something changes and we're like, oh, what do I do now? Well, you trust God. That's what you do now. He has to get rid of his I, me. How am I going to do this? Thinking. And it's time now to trust God. God is the one who's going to win the victory. It's just going to be like with Joshua when he took them around Jericho. Remember, he sent instructions about how they were supposed to go around the city. It was not a traditional battle plan. Okay? But God took care of it. Gideon is still thinking in the natural. Okay? We tend to keep thinking in the natural. He needs to be thinking in the supernatural. We need to be thinking in the supernatural of how this can happen. In the natural, it seems impossible, but we know that with God, all things are possible. Okay? So when we say, use me, Lord, I'll do whatever you want. Here I am. Send me. Well, except not there. Or, yeah, except not to them. You know, we don't get to dictate. We don't get to tell God what our assignments are. We don't get to say the what, when, where, how. We can't keep fleecing God either. We can't keep doing that and hoping that eventually we're going to get the answer that we want. Because it's not about us. You know, we just need to keep building our faith. Keep building our faith, stepping out and being obedient. And often we're scared, but when we take that first step, you know, God makes the way. He's there. Then, you know, once you've done it once, you're like, okay, that wasn't so bad. You know, God sent me to witness to that person, and I didn't die. You know, I didn't burst into flames or anything. Maybe I should have said this instead of that, but I did it, and it wasn't so bad. Probably the first time you went on a missionary trip, you're probably a little bit, I don't know about going into a different country, and you're a little bit scared, but then afterwards you come back and you're like, yeah, that wasn't so bad. I survived. I can do this. It's just like working out. You know, you got to work that. It's a muscle. You got to work it. You got to work it. You got to get that faith built up. And you know what? It's okay. God, help me with my doubt. Help me because I'm scared. Show me the way to do this. And he will, because he's a patient and he's a loving God. And he did it for Gideon. He'll do it for you. So next time we'll finish up Gideon, because the next part was just too much to try to get in today. It's about 20 till. Does anybody have anything they want to say? Any comments? All
This is Pastor Jim Furshey with Spirit Life Fellowship Church, Living the Spiritual Life. We want to thank each and every one of you for joining us today. We hope that you've been blessed by God's Word and His love for you. We pray that you remember to apply His Word to your life and continue to be a light for others as you follow Christ. If you'd like to participate in our ministry by donating, feel free to go online and click the link at the bottom of the screen and give securely with Givelify. We are located in Charleston, West Virginia, in the United States of America. Please join us again next time on Bright Star Christian Television. And if you've missed any previous message, don't worry, you can go back to our Facebook page and find them there. But please like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you don't miss any future messages. In the meantime, God bless each and every one of you.